Chapter 81, enters the top 10. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu confronted the approaching whip head-on since he had expected this kind of an attack. He quickly inclined his body towards the left, and dodged the whip's thrust. Then, he launched his counter-attack by producing 10 cuts in one breath with his blade. Each of the cuts emitted out cold light, and produced blade shadows. These 10 blade shadows roared towards Ruanji. Ruanji's complexion changed as he saw this. But, it didn't affect his mind. He quickly responded by flicking his wrist. His long whip swayed in air, and formed a black net in front of his body, like a spider's web. The black whip net acted as a shield to protect his body. Shi Mu sneered as he saw this. But, he didn't slow down his blade. Bang! The 10 blade shadows crashed against the black whip net with an ear-piercing sound. The collision transferred a huge jolt to the net shield. Then, the blade shadows disappeared. Shi Mu's eyes glared. His real qi surged within his body, and streamed into his blade. His steel blade trembled as it issued a faint droning sound with a white ray of light. Ha! Shi Mu let out a loud shout as he wielded his blade with both hands, and launched numerous cuts. The steel blade dazzled brightly. Then, 11 blade shadows emerged along with 11 cuts. 11 cuts in one breath. This boy had concealed his true strength. No wonder Brother Chu couldn't beat him. The trace of a strange look flashed through the eyes of the slim-faced junior referee as he saw this. Ruanji was alarmed, his complexion turned pale. He couldn't resist the overwhelming wave of Shi Mu's fierce attacks. The only thing he could do was to wield his whip in an attempt to resist the blows. However, he couldn't make a counter-attack as he didn't find any gap in Shi Mu's attack. Bean-sized beads of sweat started to appear on his forehead. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The black whip net was chopped down into pieces with a loud explosion. Moreover, the long black whip snapped into several fragments. Only a short handle was left in Ruanji's hand. Ruanji hadn't even recovered from the shock when another attack of 11 blade shadows came towards him. His body would be cut into several pieces if he didn't respond at once. Suddenly, a person's tall figure flashed and appeared in front of Ruanji to block the attack. It was the referee, the junior disciple with sunken cheeks. He waved his sleeve, and a short silver spear appeared in his hand to counter the blade's shadows. The tip of the spear trembled as an invisible airwave erupted out of it. The 11 blade shadows vanished with a dull thumping sound. Shi Mu was startled. Suddenly, a huge force traveled through his blade and infiltrated his body. He was overwhelmed with discomfort. But, the force stopped once it had passed through his arm. Shi Mu steadied himself. However, his complexion looked ghastly pale. Boy, if you want to disregard the customs of our sect, and want to put somebody's life in danger, then you can tell Luo Yunji. My spear will comply. The slim-faced youth took back his spear with a slight turn of his palm. There was a hint of astonishment in his eyes even though he was blurting out harsh words. The fact was that Su Mu, by whom Shi Mu had defeated earlier, was related to Luo Yunji. Moreover, Luo Yunji had been expecting him to enter the top 10 ranks of the new disciples. However, he was eliminated by Shi Mu. This made Luo Yunji unhappy and agitated. He started to harbor a secret grudge against Shi Mu. Therefore, he had hit Shi Mu with full force since he had come across a good opportunity. He was a late-stage Houtian warrior. So, he had thought that his Houtian strength will cause serious invisible injuries to Shi Mu. But, he hadn't anticipated that Shi Mu would withstand his attack in such a calm manner. I couldn't stop myself. I'm begging Senior Apprentice to forgive me. Shi Mu's vision flashed as he withdrew his steel blade. Then, he cupped his hands across his chest and spoke in an apologetic tone. Luo Yunji looked at Shi Mu in a cold manner, but he remained silent. Then, he walked to the other side of the ring. He couldn't take any other action against Shi Mu in front of the audience. Ruanji looked at Shi Mu for a while. Then, he tossed off the whip handle and walked down the ring. The winner is Shi Mu. Suddenly, the surrounding people jolted out of their dreamlike state, and burst into cheers. Shi Mu had gained a magnificent victory with his neat cuts and incredible skills. It was devoid of any irrational movements. Moreover, he had filled the air with a murderous spirit. Therefore, the people had become silent. Nobody dared to challenge Shi Mu for a long time. The match had left a huge impression on everyone's mind. Shi Mu didn't have any intention to challenge anyone because the reward for top 10 new disciples was more or less the same. Moreover, he didn't want to be in spotlight for long. He was challenged 2 more times by the end of the day. He won both the matches with flying colors, and bagged the 9th rank. Meanwhile, Lan Feng and Bai Shi grabbed the 5th and 7th ranks respectively. Even Xiaoming displayed remarkable magic skills. However, matches between magicians and martial warriors encountered several constraints. But, he still grabbed the 27th rank. He had forced his way into the top 10% of the new disciples. The next day, it was barely dawn when Shi Mu arrived at the circular plaza with his steel blade in tow. He was surprised to see that Bai Shi and Lan Feng had already arrived. Both of them were separately surrounded by a huge crowd on either side of the black stone monument. Bai Shi and Xiaoming seemed to be discussing something. Bai Shi had become famous for being a loyal person apart from his extraordinary martial arts skills. He had started to command even more respect after he had joined the Holy Spirit Association. Moreover, his extraordinary performance on the first day of the competition had towed him up to the top 10 ranks. This had uplifted his reputation even further. "Brother Shi, you're also here. You amazed us with your brilliant performance." Bai Shi greeted Shi Mu with a smile. Huo Mao and Xiaoming also welcomed him with a smile. "Brother Bai, you're flattering me. I'm an ordinary person with a brutal strength, I'm nothing in your comparison." Shi Mu waved his hand as he replied. A few people walked over to Huo Mao, who was dressed in a different manner. He wore a suit that complemented his sturdy physique. "Brother Huo, are you going to participate in today's competition?" Shi Mu and others turned to look at Huo Mao. Bai Shi noticed that he was holding a huge double-edged axe in his hand. So, he couldn't help and asked. "Yes. If you guys want to challenge me, don't blame me for not considering our friendship." Huo Mao raised his axe as he replied with a smile. The 3 of them looked at each other in dismay. Suddenly, Bai Shi broke into a laugh as he took the initiative to brush away the tension. Then, he introduced a new topic of discussion. Soon, they started to discuss the previous day's competition. The top 5 rank holders surfaced several times in their discussion. Except for Lan Feng, all the top 5 rank holders were old primary disciples who had entered the sect before the new disciples. Soon, the plaza was overflowing with people. The number of the disciples present was more than that of the previous days since all the old primary disciples had showed up. More than 200 new disciples were present at the plaza. But, only the top 30 new disciples could hope to challenge the old primary disciples. After all, the old disciples had been practicing the Houtian arts for a year longer than the new disciples. So, any low-ranking new disciple would be asking for humiliation if he or she were to challenge the old disciples. However, there were many people who didn't believe this theory, and wanted to give it a try. According to Huo Mao, the previous matches had proved that even the top 10 new disciples had a very small chance of victory against the old disciples. The second day was reserved for the new disciples' challenges to the older disciples. However, the matches wouldn't be as intense as the first and third day. Moreover, the number of matches on the second day would be far less than the first day. It was late morning. The clatters of gongs and drums, along with the announcement of the second day of the competition, had officially commenced. The droning sound of the crowd fell silent for a moment when that happened. Then, they started to exclaim in loud voices. Chapter 82, Crushing Defeats. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Each of the 10 rings had been occupied by an old disciple. But, none of the new disciples could dare to challenge them. So, the clamoring noise of the surrounding people had subsided, there was complete silence. Shi Mu was dumbfounded at the sight of this. He had seen several new disciples who were desperate to fight a moment ago, their eyes had been sparkling with an eagerness to test their strength. But now, they seemed to be waiting for a courageous person to challenge an old disciple so that they could learn from another person's mistakes before setting their own foot in the ring. Shi Mu's heart skipped a beat as he saw an anxious look on Bai Shi and Xiao Ming's faces. He was about to say something when a voice resounded, "New disciples, listen up. Today's competition would be considered as over if nobody steps out to challenge an old disciple within half an hour." Nobody had taken note when a white-haired old man with droopy eyes had appeared on the platform near the Black Stone Monument, the same monument where the ranks of the primary disciples were recorded. Now, he could be seen sitting languidly on a purple wooden chair, he held a liquor bottle in his hand. His voice wasn't loud. But, everyone in the plaza could hear it as it reverberated in all directions. The audience became excited as they heard his words. A droning sound of the new disciples' discussions and whispers was spread all around. However, most of the noises stemmed from the ridiculing laughter and sneering of the old disciples. "I'll go!" A loud shout exploded nearby Shi Mu and the other new disciples. A person's silhouette emerged from the crowd, his arms were spread out like a big bird's wings. Suddenly, he flew from the ground and took a quick turn midair. Then, he landed in the center of the ring. "My name is Kong Yang, I'd like to challenge Senior Jinghan rank 1342, the person cupped his hands across his chest as he looked towards the junior referee, and said respectfully. The rank 1342 was the lowest rank in the old primary disciples ranking list. The surrounding people broke into a discussion as they understood the situation. Their chatter and whispers gave rise to the clamoring sounds once again. Shi Mu gazed at the youth. He had bright and vivid eyes. His sturdy body was blazing with explosive strength, he didn't look like an ordinary person. Kong Yang? This name sounds familiar. Shi Mu recalled that this person was the 12th rank holder in the previous day's competition. He had expertise in a boxing style named 9-style wind cannon. His fist was as fast as the wind, and carried a formidable explosive force. "Is Jinghan present here? Come out to accept the challenge. This match will be forfeited if you don't show up till the count of 3, the junior referee sized Kong Yang up, and announced in a loud voice. Suddenly, a young man leapt out of the crowd, he had a fierce look on his face. He flipped over in air, and landed in the ring. He was shorter than his opponent. He looked at Kong Yang fiercely. "I request Senior to give me some directions." Kong Yang's sturdy physique and imposing aura appeared feeble in front of his opponent. His grandeur was swept away by the ominous glint in Jinghan's eyes, whereas his malicious gaze sent a shiver down Kong Yang's spine. So, Kong Yang clasped his hands across his chest and politely reiterated his challenge. "Enough with the rubbish talk. Now, come on," the ferocious youth glared at him as he spoke. Blood rushed to Kong Yang's brain as he heard this. He stamped his feet forcefully on the ground. Then, his stature flashed and appeared behind Jinghan. His right hand rumbled as it exuded a green light. A contemptuous look flashed through Jinghan's eyes. He didn't evade his opponent's attack. Instead, he turned his body and welcomed it. A green and a red ray sparkled as the two of them clashed with each other. Then, the rays died out. Bang! There was a burst of muffled thumping sounds as Kong Yang was sent flying in the air like an unstrung kite. He was caught outside the ring. He was unconscious, and his face looked ashen. He seemed to be heavily injured. Jinghan patted his hands, and calmly walked down the ring. Everything had happened so quickly that most of the new disciples hadn't been able to see the developments. There were several new disciples who wanted to try their luck like Kong Yang. However, this thought disappeared from their minds as they saw Kong Yang's condition. Shi Mu's complexion also darkened. He was standing far from the ring. However, he had noticed every minor detail of the match. Kong Yang's action had been fast, his fist had nearly hit his opponent. However, Jing Han's real chi was extremely profound. Therefore, the strength of his fire-style fist had sent Kong Yang flying in the air. Jing Han's brutal aura lingered on, even though he had walked down the ring. No one dared to challenge another old disciple for some time. Shi Mu was still pondering over the last match when he noticed Bai Shi leaping up into the ring. He had a broad smile on his face. He challenged the old disciple named Gong Chun Peng. The man was ranked 1341. A black-robed youth with ordinary facial features appeared in front of Bai Shi. They greeted each other formally. Then, the match began. Bai Shi entered his violent mode at once. The muscles of his arms swelled up, and he started to bombard fists on his opponent. His fists produced whines with loud and intermittent rumbles, a wide-stretched and faint red light bubbled up, and filled the air with scorching hot air waves. The people close to the ring felt a fervent air against their faces. Shi Mu's vision became intense. It seemed that Bai Shi had strengthened his real chi after he had joined the Holy Spirit Association. He had probably reached a higher stage of the All-Yang art. The progress could be substantiated on the basis of his blazing fire fist since it was shrouded in a faint red glow. However, the black-robed youth looked calm and unperturbed. He stood motionless as Bai Shi launched his attack. Then, he lifted his right hand. It transformed into a light blue palm's shadow, and spread in all directions. His palm blocked Bai Shi's attack. Bai Shi was startled at the sight of this. However, the muscles of his arms bulged even thicker. Then, he started to bombard his fist's shadows in all directions. The size of the shadows had increased by 3 inches. After that, his fist's shadows shrouded the black-robed youth like a group of fervent airwaves. The black-robed youth finally moved. He took a quick rotation. Suddenly, a blue cyclone emerged, and crushed the surrounding fist shadows. Then, his figure split into 3 shadows which pounced on Bai Shi. Suddenly, something flashed before Bai Shi's eyes. He realized that the black-robed youth was standing in front of him. He quickly held up his arms to shield his chest, stomach, and other vital organs. But, his efforts went in vain as a huge blue-colored palm as hard as steel got engraved on his body. Bang! A loud sound echoed. It seemed as if a huge mountain-like force had welled up. Bai Shi's arms had become numb because of the brutal force of the attack. He couldn't breathe. However, the black-robed youth didn't stop. His black figure flashed as he thrust his right leg into Bai Shi's chest, like a long spear. Bai Shi felt like throwing up, and his body started to tremble. He was thrown into the air like a worn-out sack. Everyone outside the ring was in shock. Suddenly, Xiaoming leapt up and grasped Bai Shi in midair. He landed on the ground with a formidable force. In fact, he was forced 3 steps backwards before he was able to steady himself. All this had happened within a fleeting moment even though it looked like a long process. The new disciples had only noticed Bai Shi throwing fist shadows in all directions, and the black-robed youth's figure flashing, and then Bai Shi was flying by the force of his foot. They were astounded and scared. They started to discuss among each other. Bai Shi sat down cross-legged with Xiaoming's support. He closed his eyes and rested for a moment. His complexion gradually returned to its normal color. "Brother Bai, are you all right?" Shi Mu walked over to him and looked at the terrible footprint on his chest. Then, he asked in a dignified tone. Bai Shi slowly opened his eyes. He shook his head as he flashed a bitter smile at Shi Mu. Suddenly, Shi Mu caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Bai Shi and Xiaoming were also looking in the same direction. The 3 of them had turned at the same time to glance at the figure. They found Lan Feng standing in a ring at a distance. She had chosen her competitor. It was a pretty girl in pink clothing. Her opponent stood in the rings as well right in front of her. Chapter 83, Forfeit. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The pink-attired girl's movements were quick. She shuttled back and forth in the ring like a shadow, leaving behind blurred pink afterimages. Lan Feng was proud of her terrific speed. However, it appeared insignificant in comparison to speed of her opponent's movements. Everyone had anticipated that Lan Feng would be defeated within a couple of moves. But suddenly, a crisp sound of jingling of bells resounded through the plaza. The pink-attired girl became pale as she heard it, and her pace slowed down. Shi Mu and Bai Shi looked at each other. They knew that Lan Feng had resorted to the power of her blood. The pink-attired girl snorted and flicked her hand. Suddenly, several blood-red paper charms appeared in her hand. Then, they transformed into a layer of red light. This red light enveloped her entire body, and her figure started to look fuzzy. Finally, she transformed into a faint pink shadow, and whizzed past Lan Feng. Plop! A loud sound was heard. Lan Feng could be seen lying on the ground unconscious. Shi Mu shook his head as he saw this, his eyes flickered in an indeterminate manner. There was only a few months of difference between the Hotian arts practice of the new and old disciples. How could it create such a massive disparity between them? Suddenly, the whole picture became clear to him. Now, he was fully aware of the Black Demon sect's power, and that of the other 7 big sects of the 3 nations. He had been struck by a new understanding. Moreover, he realized that the second day's competition was organized by the sect in order to snatch away the spirit and confidence of the new disciples. This round of the competition was supposed to give them a clear picture. The sect encouraged competition, but it supported true strength over courage. These old disciples were low-ranked. Moreover, they seemed to be at the primary stages of the Hotian arts. But, there was a huge difference between their strength, and that of the new disciples. Shi Mu realized that he had little chance of victory even if he were to combine the power of his 13 series of Gale Force Blade Art with his extraordinary physical strength. There was no way that he could be promoted in the ranking list. Shi Mu made a firm resolve as these thoughts crossed his mind. Then, 3 new disciples initiated their challenges, and got defeated by the old disciples in quick succession. However, one of them nearly fought to a draw. But, he lost the match as his real chi was inferior to that of the old disciples. The new disciples had a dejected look on their faces. But, their spirits got lifted as they saw this. They started to initiate more challenges, so much so that 4 challenges were simultaneously taking place in 4 rings. Xiaoming couldn't repress his eagerness either. He threw a meaningful glance at Shi Mu and Bai Shi, and strode towards the nearby ring. He ran for a few steps. Then, he shot up in the sky and landed in the ring with a determined look on his face. After that, he mentioned the name of the disciple he wanted to challenge. It was the 1300th rank holder. An obese youth appeared in the ring. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he saw this. "Brother Bai, is Brother Xiao a registered magician practitioner of our sect?" He turned his head and asked Bai Shi. "Yes." He took the test and passed. He was detected with 3 degrees in fire element induction force in the Hall of Magic, Bai Shi replied. Shi Mu nodded as he heard this. It seemed as if he had anticipated this reply. Xiaoming's opponent looked sluggish because of his weight. Moreover, Xiaoming's art focused on utilizing one's flexibility. Therefore, he could restrain his opponent even though he was a magician. Xiaoming looked at the obese youth. The fat disciple had already thought of a countermeasure. And, Shi Mu had already guessed the reason. Jin Huan must have leaked all this information to the fat disciple in advance. Both the parties greeted each other. Then, the match began. Xiaoming fixed his eyes on his opponent's movements. Meanwhile, he started to mutter incantations. This stirred up the magical powers within his body, and they started to take a mysterious form. Then, a gust of scalding hot air gushed out of his body and spread out like ripples. "A magician!" Someone in the crowd called out in alarm. The complexion of the obese youth changed. A stern look flashed through his eyes as he ferociously stomped his foot on the floor. Bang! The entire ring vibrated with a loud sound. He bounced up in the air with great force, and threw himself at Xiaoming like a meteor. He pounded his fists forward, both of them at the same time. Two massive fist winds burst out with a flash of yellow light. It appeared as if two megaliths were tumbling down a huge mountain. A fierce and imposing aura rushed out from both sides as his two fists converged into one attack. Xiaoming's clothes had started to flutter even though he hadn't yet faced the fist wind. Suddenly, Xiaoming's feet intertwined as he attempted to display the lost steps to dodge his opponent's attack. Then, his complexion changed. He realized that his real chi was nothing in comparison to the converging attack of the fierce fist winds of his opponent. Moreover, he started to find faults with the lost steps that he had been practicing. Xiaoming gritted his teeth in desperation as he pointed his right index finger forward. Suddenly, a group of human head-sized fireballs flashed. They rushed towards the obese youth with great speed. The speed of his attack had increased by a third since the last time Shi Mu had seen it. The obese youth was still midair. He realized that he couldn't evade these fireballs at any cost. Suddenly, that pair of yellow glowing fists changed into multiple fist shadows, and collided with the approaching fireballs. Bang! The fireballs exploded midair, their flame spread in all directions. The obese youth was pushed back a few steps by the intense air wave. But, he immediately sprang up and rushed towards Xiaoming. Xiaoming stopped chanting incantations since his opponent had reached extremely close to him. Then, he started to focus on his lost steps art. Suddenly, he fluttered backwards like a fallen leaf to dodge his opponent's blow. However, the obese youth didn't give up. He started to chase Xiaoming all over the ring. Xiaoming understood that he had no choice but to accept defeat because he couldn't beat his opponent. Moreover, he hadn't been able to find any opportunity to use his magic skills. Therefore, he jumped down the ring after being pursued for a while, and admitted his defeat. Shi Mu let out a soft sigh as he saw this. Then, he turned around and left the plaza. Several days later, Shi Mu exhibited 5 postures towards heaven, one as he practiced the art of breeding heavenly elephants in his room. "Excuse me, is brother Shi Mu inside? I'm here to deliver the reward of the quarterly competition." There were a few rhythmic knocks on his door. Then, the voice of an unfamiliar young man was heard. A hint of exhilaration flashed through Shi Mu's eyes as he heard this. He quickly responded, and got out of the bed. He opened the door to find a black uniformed janitor disciple standing at his door. The disciple had a parcel in his hand. "I'm Shi Mu. Please give me the parcel," Shi Mu said. The janitor disciple knew Shi Mu. Therefore, he handed over the parcel to him after a single glance. They exchanged greetings. Then, he turned around and departed. Shi Mu went inside his room and untied the package. There were 2 white bottles and 50,000 silver notes inside it. Shi Mu was delighted. He opened one of the bottles and sniffed it. It was the blood-strengthening pills. However, he was more excited about the 50,000 silver notes. That was because he was running short on money, and the pills that he required were nearly consumed up. Therefore, he could use the 50,000 silvers to buy blood-strengthening and bone-tempering pills. So, he put away the blood-strengthening pills, and walked out towards the shops. He finally returned to his room with huge quantities of pills. He seemed to be in a joyful mood. It seemed as if he wouldn't need to go out again in the near future. Chapter 84, Charm Magic. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his stone bed. There was a trace of hesitation in his eyes. He had realized that the 50,000 silvers that he had just received were like a drop in the bucket if the consumption rate for his current practice was to be considered. Moreover, the consumption rate would increase as he leveled up in his corresponding art. Therefore, it was time for him to study the books of charm and formula magic that he had received from the general library. Shi Mu flipped over his right hand, and took out a jade slip that contained the charm magic art. He placed it against his forehead. Suddenly, numerous characters started to float inside his mind. He exhaled a long breath as he put down the jade slip after a while. Then, he took out the silver-colored jade slip that contained the comprehensive introduction to formula arts, and started to study it through meditation. He had finished studying both the arts after a while. He realized that Master Ju was right, the formula and the charm art were closely related to each other. It could be said that charm magic was a miniature form of formula magic. Moreover, charm magic was quite simple in comparison to formula magic. However, it wasn't as powerful as formula magic. But, it still had two advantages: it was convenient to carry, and could be casted quickly. In addition, it needed only a little consumption of magic power, and could display a string of benefits. The formula magic art appeared simple in comparison to the process of drawing a paper charm. A magician had to go through incessant practice sessions to draw a preliminary level paper charm. Drawing a paper charm was a profound path that a magician was supposed to walk on. Shi Mu held his chin and began to ponder as he realized that the charm and formula magic arts were closely related to each other. Shi Mu decided to start his practice with the simpler one, the charm magic. He would move on to practice the formula art once he was proficient in the charm magic art. He was no more confused as he had finally reached a decision. So, he put away the silver-colored jade slip and started to study the sacred book of charm magic. The first half of the art consisted of the introduction to the charm magic. According to this ancient book, the charm language was a kind of heavenly language that contained the strength of heaven and earth. Each character of this language held the power of subtle principle within it. From a simple pattern to a complicated magic seal, everything was based on the basic foundation of charm language. Therefore, one must be able to comprehend and draw a charm character by oneself in order to draw a paper charm. Interestingly, all charm characters had originated from the basic 5 elements. So, one could make complicated paper charms by passing through different combinations as long as one could grasp the charm characters of the basic 5 elements. Shi Mu felt uneasy as he read that it was extremely difficult to comprehend the charm language. Therefore, there were only a handful of people who wished to be charm magicians. A number of people failed to draw a single character of 5 elements even after practicing and learning the charm characters through painstaking meditation process for several years. All of them had eventually given up. Shi Mu's complexion turned pale as this thought flashed through his mind. However, he couldn't quit since he had chosen to be a magician practitioner and had spent a huge amount of resources to purchase the books related to this art. A firm and resolute look flashed through his eyes. He sat down cross-legged. Then, he took a deep breath and adjusted his mind. A cold feeling started to swirl in his mind as his breathing became slower. Then, he picked up the jade slip with a dignified look on his face. He seemed prepared to learn the charm characters of the first 5 basic elements from the ancient book. Several hundred basic charm characters were recorded in the book of the sacred book of magical charms. Shi Mu was a beginner. So, he chose the simplest character, which consisted of a few strokes of fire element charm character. 3 days passed in a blink of an eye. Shi Mu still sat on his bed with crossed legs and closed eyes. Suddenly, a group of fuzzy red light balls appeared in his mind. They looked like a living creature as they went through elongated deformation. It seemed as if they wanted to transform into some characters. The upper half of the fuzzy red light balls gradually took the shape of a strange mark, the lower half continued to go through the process of stretching and deforming. Ping! The group of red light balls shook as they exploded. Shi Mu issued a muffled groan, and opened his eyes. He was sweating profusely and breathing heavily, his face looked ghastly pale. He lifted his hand and touched his face under the nose. He realized that blood was dripping down from his nostrils. He was taken aback. He sighed and cleaned the blood. Then, he stood up and moved to the window to look outside. He got lost in thought as he stared at the dark sky. The words written in the ancient book were correct. It was indeed difficult to understand these charm characters. He couldn't understand the essence of even the simplest character of the fire element even after 3 days of meditation. Could it be that I don't have the talent to become a charm magician? Shi Mu sighed as the thought crossed his mind. To perceive these characters through meditation was only the first step. He would have to go through 2 more steps if he wished to make a paper charm. He needed to portray each character on the paper charm after comprehending them successfully. To draw the charm characters to make charm magic was considered to be the second step. Every magic art of the 5 elements, even the simplest fireball technique, had its own corresponding formula. A simple paper charm could be made by using 5 or 6 charm characters. However, dozens or even hundreds of charm characters were required to constitute a complex paper charm. Moreover, the process of drawing a charm character didn't allow even the slightest mistake. It needed utmost precision and years of practice to gain expertise in making a paper charm. Once a symbol was drawn appropriately, then the next and the third steps were relatively easier. The third step consisted of pouring the magic power in a properly drawn paper charm. It was similar to storing the magic power in the paper charm in advance. It would be needed to cast a magic spell in the future. So, the might of the paper charm could be unleashed whenever needed with a little guidance. There were several limitations to this step, even though it seemed quite simple. A majority of charm magicians possessed 2 or 3 element induction forces. And, one couldn't go beyond their elements while instilling the spirit power. So, Shi Mu would have to resort to corresponding spirit stones to supplement any other element that he couldn't sense. These spirit stones were sold at high prices. Therefore, people had been getting confused by these 3 steps since the beginning. I've just started to practice the charm magic. So, it's too early to talk about the first 2 steps. Shi Mu remained silent for a long while. He shook his head to push out all the gloomy thoughts from his mind. He had been lost in his thoughts while staring out of the window for almost half an hour. A crescent moon started to sprinkle its silver radiance in all directions as it rose from the western horizon. Shi Mu's face started to beam with happiness as he saw this. The weather hadn't been good since the last few days. Shi Mu hadn't been able to enter his dreamland because the moon had rarely appeared. Therefore, he hadn't been able to practice the moon swallowing art. He stopped thinking about the charm magic and arranged his room. Then, he opened the door and walked out. He had arrived at the open lawn in the woods after a quarter of an hour. Then, he sat down cross-legged with a calm and empty mind. Soon, he entered into his dreamland. He again reincarnated as a white ape under the bright radiance of the moon in his dreamland. Then, he started to exhibit the posture of the moon swallowing art. Several luminous dots appeared in the sky and started to stream down into the ape's pupils as always. Shi Mu was exhilarated as he realized that the gathering speed of the luminous dots had increased in comparison to the previous dream. It seemed that his absorption speed of the moonlight's essence had increased with the enhancement of his magic powers. A cold feeling began to grow as more and more luminous dots streamed down into his mind. The anxiety and depression caused during the practice of the magic charms gradually faded away. The dense luminous dots that were gathering in his mind started to transform into a white fog. Then, the white fog started to gather and took the form of a cluster of milky white clouds. Suddenly, Shi Mu's heart skipped a beat. He realized that the cluster of white clouds in his mind seemed to be similar to the group of fuzzy red light balls which he had seen while he was trying to comprehend the charm language. Chapter 85, Congealing Charms and Dream. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu started to resolve his spirit power since an idea crossed his mind. He wanted to try and condense the cluster of the white cloud in his mind into a charm character. He had started this procedure only for the sake of giving it a try. Who would have thought that something strange would come out of this unusual idea? Suddenly, the cluster of the milky white clouds started to move rapidly. Then, they started to congeal into a charm character. It was the fire attribute charm character that he had previously failed to perceive several times. However, this charm character was white in color. The white charm character crumbled and transformed into a cluster of white clouds as Shi Mu took a momentary pause. Shi Mu was startled. Could it be that the charm character he had condensed in his dream wouldn't be of any use? He smiled bitterly, and started to calm his mind. Then, he looked up and transformed into the white ape. He started to absorb the moonlight essence while practicing the moon-swallowing art once again. The night passed in a flash. The sky was getting clearer. The dawn was about to arrive, the moon had slid beneath the horizon. Shi Mu's body quivered as he woke up from his dream, he was extremely excited. He felt a sense of refreshment in his entire body. He exhaled a long breath. Then, he stood up and examined the spirit power within his mind. Suddenly, his body became stiff and motionless. He could see a blood-red character floating inside his mind, it was glowing. It was the same fire attribute character that he had failed to perceive after 3 days of meditation. This. He was left thunderstruck, he almost couldn't believe it. His face bloomed with happiness. Then, he considered his surroundings and controlled himself, he didn't want to burst out laughing in the open. The ecstatic expression on his face receded as his mood returned to its serene state. The white ape's dreamland had far surpassed his imagination. He shook the morning dew off his body. Then, he started to walk towards his house. Several days later, Shi Mu arrived at the plaza in an ecstatic mood. He stopped in front of a 3-storied building. It had a glazing red-tiled roof. This place was designed to sell magic objects. It was called the House of the 5 Elements. Shi Mu had seen this place before as the Aromatic Pills Pavilion was situated on the street next to it. Shi Mu had taken a note of this place when he had visited the Aromatic Pills Pavilion to purchase pills. Shi Mu was about to enter the place when he discovered that nobody was inside the shop. The first thing that he saw was a huge scarlet wooden counter. A thin middle-aged man stood behind the counter. He had a long beard like a goat's. He was rummaging through a thick wad of hides. 2 black-robed janitor disciples were assisting him in checking the inventory and completing other tasks. "Sire, please come inside. How can I help you? Do you want to buy or sell something?" The middle-aged man turned around, and greeted Shi Mu with a smile. "Oh, do you purchase things as well?" Shi Mu was startled at first. Then, he asked in a casual manner. "Yes. We accept various kinds of things related to magic. Does Sire have something he would like to sell here?" The middle-aged man's eyes lit up as he asked. "No. I'm here to buy material to draw paper charms." "I hope that the shopkeeper would recommend some good material," Shi Mu replied with a smile. "You only need a magic brush, magic ink, and some charm papers in order to draw a paper charm in an efficient manner." "Sire, please look at this. This is the best charm paper in the shop. It was made by blending several precious materials with 100-year-old purple spirit wood. It efficiently absorbs magic ink. In fact, it can even enhance the might of the paper charm," the middle-aged man explained. Meanwhile, he pulled out a wad of charm paper from the shelf behind him. Suddenly, the air was filled with an unusual fragrance. "What's the price of this wad of charm paper?" Shi Mu asked. "Not much, just 30,000 silvers," the man stretched out 3 fingers as he spoke. Shi Mu was shocked to hear such an exorbitant price even though he was prepared in his heart. The cost of 100 pages of charm papers was 30,000 silvers. This meant that the price of a single piece of charm paper was 300 silvers. Then what's the price of the cheapest paper?" Shi Mu's brows wrinkled as he asked. 1,500 silvers. The man's smile receded as he heard this. He put down the precious paper, and replied in a cold voice. "Well, then what about the price of the cheapest ink and brush?" Shi Mu calculated in his mind, and asked. "Each of them costs 3,000 silvers. Well, I'd like to buy a set of them." Shi Mu clenched his teeth as he took out 7,500 silver notes from his bosom, and handed them over to him. The middle-aged man received the paper notes with an expressionless face. He took a look, and waved to a nearby janitor disciple. He whispered a few words in his ear as he arrived. Then, the janitor disciple turned around, and left to fetch the wad. After that, the man turned around and began to flip through the hides. He seemed to have forgotten about Shi Mu's presence. However, Shi Mu wasn't affected by this treatment. Instead, he felt free. So, he started to size up the magic objects that were kept in the shop. "Brother! Your items!" The janitor disciple approached Shi Mu and handed over a parcel to him. The package consisted of a low-grade magic brush, a bottle of ordinary red ink and a stack of 100 pages of yellow charm paper. The magic brush and red ink seemed to be made up of some unknown beast's essence and hair. Shi Mu nodded as he examined the contents. Then, the janitor disciple wrapped them up and handed them over to Shi Mu. Shi Mu left the place, and rushed towards his room. He arrived at his room after a short while. He sat on his stone bed and adjusted his breathing. Then, he adjusted his physical and mental states to their best. After that, he got up and went to his stone table. He then took out a single charm paper from the bundle. He spread it on the table carefully, and took out the magic ink and brush. A light smell of blood was spread around as he opened the lid of the ink bottle. He then picked up the magic brush, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, the red charm character appeared in his mind. It was rotating. He let out a sigh as he opened his eyes. He recalled the red character as he dipped the brush in the ink. Then, he slowly drew the character on the charm paper in an extremely careful manner. It took him a while to complete the charm character. He realized that he was covered in sweat as he finished drawing the character. He narrowed his eyes as he picked up the paper. He cautiously looked at it for some time. He was finally convinced that he hadn't committed any mistake. He felt relieved and calmed down. Then, he pointed his right index finger at the paper. Suddenly, his magic powers surged up from his dantian. Then, he started to pour out his magic powers into the paper charm as per the instructions given in the sacred book of charm magic. Several luminous dots emerged on the paper and joined together as he started to infuse his magic powers with it. The charm character dazzled up when he had finished instilling the last bit of his magic powers. Then, it started to wriggle like a living animal. Everything seemed to have gone smoothly. So, Shi Mu put down the brush and waved his hand. Suddenly, the paper charm flew to his hand. Then, he rubbed the paper and threw it in the air. Bang! There was a loud explosion as the paper charm ignited itself. Then, the bean-sized spark spread out and burnt the entire paper. The magic that he had instilled into it had been unleashed. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness as he saw this. However, his face soon became expressionless. He realized that this was only a trivial accomplishment. The charm character was only a basic fire element character. It wouldn't exhibit any remarkable might even if he memorized it. It could only be used to ignite fire. Moreover, the sacred book of charm magic only contained a few elementary formulas of the 5 elements apart from some basic characters. He realized that General Library's Master Ju had indeed been right. He could find all the powerful formulas of this sect in the Holy Spirit Pavilion, but at exorbitant prices. He shook his head and put away the things. Then, he went to his bed and sat down cross-legged. He could accept a variety of well-paid tasks in the Hall of Wealth as long as he could become a true charm magician. This would pave his way towards massive resource accumulation for his future practice. Shi Mu became overwhelmed as this thought crossed his mind. Then, he took out the sacred book of charm magic from his bosom, and started to work on the next character. Chapter 86, The Fight. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. 6 months later. 7 or 8 black-robed old disciples were gathered in the small yard outside Shi Mu's stone house. They stood silently, as if waiting for someone. Their leader was the golden-haired youth Jin Huan of the Holy Spirit Association. There was another gathering of 10 new disciples a little far away from Shi Mu's room. They seemed to be watching the proceedings. They were occasionally whispering to each other. "Brother Jin, it seems that Brother Shi has gone out. He may not be back for a while. I'll stay and watch." Huo Mao stood beside Jin Huan. He spoke in a soft tone. The front door of Shi Mu's stone house was tightly shut. It seemed that he wasn't in his room at the moment. Don't worry. I've got nothing to do today. I can wait a little longer. These paper charms are extremely important to us. I can't take a risk. I can't let this chance slide from my hands. I must personally meet Brother Shi, and ask him to make a few charms for us. Jin Huan shook his head and replied in a soft tone. Huo Mao nodded as he heard this. He didn't say anything else. Bai Shi and Xiao Ming stood next to Huo Mao. I always knew that Brother Shi wasn't an ordinary disciple. But, I could never imagine that he would have a great skill in magic, and he could make paper charms in such a proficient manner. He's been into it for just 6 months, and he can already make elementary level paper charms, Bai Shi sighed as he said. Jin Huan and Huo Mao nodded with a smile. Suddenly, an unpleasant expression shadowed Jin Huan's smiling face. Shi Mu had revealed his charm-making talent 6 months ago. This news hadn't only astonished the new disciples, but had also left several old disciples thunderstruck. There were only a handful of magician practitioners in the Black Demon sect. Charm magicians were even fewer in number. Therefore, Shi Mu had become one of the few charm magicians in the sect. The old disciples were wary of offending him even though he could only make elementary level charms of the 5 elements. Moreover, Shi Mu had exhibited a high success rate in making a paper charm to perfection. His success rate was higher in comparison with the other charm magicians of the sect. In fact, he had far surpassed his fellow charm magicians. The number of disciples that would approach Shi Mu with a request to make paper charms was getting higher by the day, so much so that Shi Mu was forced to decline a few of them. Therefore, Jin Huan and other disciples had to personally come to his room. Jin Huan was upset and annoyed. He had never thought that Shi Mu would become so famous. Otherwise, he would have pulled him into their group by alluring him with any amount of resources he wanted. Now, Shi Mu's glory had spread everywhere. Therefore, it had become extremely difficult to attract him into their group. Moreover, it was reported that a few elders of the sect had started to notice him. Jin Huan sighed secretly as this thought crossed his mind. Xiao Ming also looked perplexed. It had been 6 months since he had joined the Holy Spirit Association. However, he had failed to make a single paper charm. He hadn't been able to learn even 2 or 3 elementary level charm characters so far, let alone make paper charms. Some new disciples were silently watching from a distance. Suddenly, they burst into an uproar. They hurriedly drew back to a side, and made way for another group of old disciples. Jin Huan looked in their direction as he heard the noise. Suddenly, his brows wrinkled. The new group of old disciples was the Blood Dragon Gang led by Chu Kun. Chu Kun was startled when he saw Jin Huan and his group stationed outside Shi Mu's door. However, he approached them with a soft chuckle. He stopped at a little distance from them. He then said, "Brother Jin, I never thought that such a great person of the Holy Spirit Association would show up here. Are you also looking for Brother Shi? We're in the same boat. Brother Chu, you too are a famous person of the Blood Dragon Gang. You still showed up here," Jin Huan replied in a light tone. He. Brother Shi is extraordinarily talented. So, it was important to personally visit him, Chu Kun said with a smile. Enough of these rubbish talks. The Blood Dragon Gang had deliberately raised the reward price 6 months ago, and had asked Brother Shi to make dozens of paper charms. We the Holy Spirit Association didn't interfere at that time. Now, it's our turn to request paper charms for our group, Jin Huan replied in a cold voice. The higher the price, the better the quality of the work, that's always been the rule. Brother Shi was happy to accept our request back then. He doesn't need to take Brother Jin's consent before accepting any offers, isn't it? Chu Kun retorted with a cold face. A cold confrontation between 2 formidable groups gave rise to a murderous aura. The new disciples were forced to retreat a few steps to avoid being caught up in a disastrous conflict. However, a hint of an irresistible excitement lingered on their faces. They continued to watch the fun proceedings. Jin Huan's expression turned even gloomier. He stared at Chu Kun with eyes as sharp as knives. What's wrong? Look at Brother Jin's face. Can it be that you want to start a fight? Chu Kun stuck out his chest as he spoke fearlessly. I've heard that Brother Chu has just chosen a sword art named the Wolf and Moon art. I would like to take your advice regarding it. It's a chance encounter. Let's take advantage of this opportunity, and see who the better one amongst us is. How about this, the one who loses will give up looking for Brother Shi. A cold look flashed across Jin Huan's eyes as he said. Haha. Brother Jin, we're here to ask Brother Shi to make some paper charms for us. Why should we get injured? If you want to start a fight, then don't forget that the annual competition is just around the corner. You'll get plenty of chances to fight with me in a ring. Chu Kun burst out laughing as he spoke. He neither approved nor disapproved. It seems like Brother Chu is afraid to fight me. I won't force you anymore. But I request the Blood Dragon Gang to leave at once in order to avoid any injury, Jin Huan sneered as he warned. However, he felt helpless in his heart. The Holy Spirit Association had failed a task. This had led them to suffer huge financial losses. Therefore, they wouldn't be able to beat the Blood Dragon Gang if both the groups were to compete in terms of financial ability. Otherwise, he was unlikely to resort to such a dreadful plan. Jin Huan and his group members smiled as he finished speaking. They threw contemptuous looks towards the Blood Dragon Gang. Humph! If Brother Jin is so interested to fight, then I'm ready. My sword is desperate to taste some blood. Chu Kun looked around. Then, he tightened his grip on his long sword's handle as he replied with a vicious smile. He knew that his position was a little lower than Jin Huan's in the eyes of the primary disciples. Moreover, he wasn't confident of defeating his opponent. However, he couldn't compromise the reputation of his group in front of so many people. Therefore, the only choice he had was to give it a try. He was also aware that he had made a tremendous progress in his martial arts in the past 6 months. So, even if he couldn't defeat his opponent, he could at least make an effort to bring this match to a draw. He was sure that he could accomplish this. Jin Huan forced a cold smile, and waved his hand. The people standing behind him were forced to go back a few steps. Meanwhile, Chu Kun's people also stepped back to make space for the two opponents. Chu Kun pulled out his sword with a whistling sound. The sword was half an inch longer than regular swords, a red mark could be seen on its edge. It seemed to be contaminated with blood, so much so that it was emitting a nauseating smell. Jin Huan didn't move, it seemed as if he didn't intend to use any weapons. Eat this! Chu Kun got angry as he saw Jin Huan empty-handed, this seemed to have humiliated him. He shouted out loud as he swayed his long sword. Then, he thrust it towards Jin Huan with a terrific speed, like speed of the mighty river Yangtze's current. 1. His entire body emitted a murderous aura. Suddenly, a sword wind appeared. It pierced the air and advanced towards his opponent with a whew sound, like the whining of ghosts. Jin Huan's eyes flashed. He stomped his feet on the ground. A powerful aura burst out of his body with a boom sound. Suddenly, his figure flashed and disappeared. As a result, Chu Kun's sword missed its target. Then, he sensed something ominous rushing towards him. However, he couldn't respond. Suddenly, the air around him exploded as he was kicked hard by a dense pale golden foot. It seemed as if a cluster of stars had plummeted down on him. It was far more oppressive than Chu Kun's sword momentum. Chu Kun's complexion changed. Then, he wielded his sword. It produced red sword shadows which condensed into a faint image of a giant wolf. Notes: 1. Yangtze is the longest river in China. Third longest in the world. This river is often mentioned in the novel to draw comparisons. Chapter 87, Qi Explosion Technique. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Clank. The sounds of metal collision rang out in all directions. Jin Huan was in midair, his feet were shrouded in a thin layer of the pale golden light of his real qi. This golden light made it seem as if his feet were made of iron. They didn't get wounded as they clashed with Chu Kun's long sword. The two of them collided more than a dozen times. They were moving extremely fast, so much so that the surrounding disciples couldn't see them clearly. Jin Huan shouted out loud as he exerted pressure on Chu Kun's long sword with his feet. His body leveraged in midair, and flipped over as he pointed his finger in Chu Kun's direction. The action of pointing out a finger looked sluggish and unpleasant. But, it rendered a surreptitious, gloomy, and eerie feeling. It was poles apart from the tyrannical leg technique that he had used a moment ago. Puff! Chu Kun couldn't come up with any countermeasure. The shadows of his sword failed to protect him from the approaching finger. A few inches long bloodstain appeared across his cheek. He staggered back a few steps as blood gushed out from the wound. Jin Huan retracted his hands. Then, he steadily landed on the ground. Honor the commitment. Jin Huan smiled and spoke in a light tone. Chu Kun's complexion turned pale. He slowly slipped his sword into its sheath. He didn't wipe the bloodstain off his face. Humph! He grunted heavily. Then, he turned around and walked away. The other members of the Blood Dragon gang followed him hurriedly. Suddenly, the surrounding disciples burst into applause. They hadn't gotten to watch such a splendid fight between two old disciples in the quarterly competition. They were extremely fascinated by this short, yet breathtaking battle. Senior Jin's golden axe leg art and magic mark finger were exquisite. Perhaps, he has reached the consummate stage of both these arts, Bai Shi spoke in a respectful tone. Hehe, these two Houtian level martial arts techniques are quite abstruse. I've achieved a small success, that's all. Jin Huan shook his head as he replied. He didn't seem to be in a pleasant mood. He had gone through the painstaking training of several years to master these two martial arts techniques. The magic mark finger had especially been difficult to learn. He had planned to expose these techniques in the annual competition. However, he was forced to display them ahead of time. So now, he wouldn't be able to achieve an astonishing effect in the competition. Bai Shi and other people noticed the gloomy look on Jin Huan's face. So, they didn't pursue the matter any further. They waited for some more time. Finally, a tall person's figure could be seen walking over from the mountain road. It was none other than Shi Mu. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows as he saw the people gathered around his stone house. Brother Shi, we've been waiting for you for a long time, Jin Huan greeted him with a smile. I went out to run some errands. I kept Brother Jin and others waiting for so long. I'm really sorry for that, Shi Mu replied with a smile. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Brother Shi is a busy person now, unlike us. We had nothing important to do today. So, we hit this place a bit early, Jin Huan replied with a smile. He sounded as if he was trying to flatter Shi Mu. Shi Mu greeted Bai Shi, Xiao Ming, Huo Mao and his other acquaintances with a nod. Brother Jin, were you seeking me to make paper charms? Shi Mu asked. That's right, Brother Shi. I urgently need a few dozen paper charms. I couldn't think of anyone other than you who could efficiently complete this task in a short time. As far as the reward is concerned, we won't disappoint you, Jin Huan spoke. What kind of charms do you need, and in what quantity? Shi Mu's eyes flashed. He pondered for a moment and asked. Jin Huan heaved a sigh of relief as he heard these words. Then, he went closer to him and whispered a few words into his ear. Shi Mu paused for a moment, he seemed to be considering the offer carefully. Well, no problem. Brother Jin, you can come after 5 days to collect your requested charms, he said. Well then, Brother Shi, please accept this. Jin Huan waved to a fellow disciple as an indication to hand over a bulging packet of silver notes to Shi Mu. Shi Mu received the packet. He then slightly opened it for a quick examination. He nodded his acceptance. He exchanged a few more words with these people before he bid his goodbye. Then, he opened the door of his room and went inside. Jin Huan continued to gaze at Shi Mu's closed door for a while. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief, and left the place along with the other disciples. The surrounding people dispersed as they realized that nothing interesting was left for them to see. Shi Mu placed the parcel on his table, and sat down. The number of charms requested by Jin Huan was quite large. However, they were the low-ordered and ordinary charms that wouldn't be difficult to complete in the given time. In fact, he could complete it within 3 days. Moreover, the reward was pretty good. So, he couldn't reject the offer. Shi Mu pondered over this matter for a while. Then, he took out a brown bottle from his bosom and opened its lid. A strange smell greeted him. He looked inside, and found a bright yellow-colored pill. It was exuding a mild yellow luminescence. He had gone out to purchase this pill. He had practiced magic arts with full concentration over the past 6 months. However, he hadn't ignored the practice of martial arts either. He had earned plenty of resources by making paper charms for other disciples. So, he had been able to support his practice. In fact, he had made his breakthrough to the 2nd stage of the art of breeding heaven elephants. Moreover, he was on the verge of breaking through the 3rd stage. This yellow pill was called the Heavenly Spirit Pill. It had played a significant role in his breakthrough. However, he needed to prioritize his targets now. Shi Mu let out a soft sigh as this thought crossed his mind. He calmed his mind down, and put the bottle away. Then, he picked up the packet that he had received from Jin Huan, and pulled out a piece of charm paper from it. He placed it on top of the table. Several days later, Shi Mu sat down cross-legged on the floor of his stone house. His upper body was naked, and his eyes were closed. Steam rose from the top of his head. His entire body was perspiring, so much so that a thick layer of his sweat was pouring down from it. The color of his skin grew redder with the passage of time. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and let out a loud shout. Bang! A muffled thunderous sound was heard. A powerful burst of chi escaped from his body and spread in all directions. A nearby stone stool was shot and sent flying like a rubber ball. It crashed against the wall with a loud sound. Suddenly, Shi Mu's skin returned to its normal color. He slowly stood up. His face and eyes were brimming with happiness. He had finally ascended to the 3rd stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with the support of the Heavenly Spirit Pill. He felt an overwhelming strength inside his body, it was hard to restrain. He looked around, and his eyes fell on the steel blade that hung on the wall. Suddenly, an idea struck his mind. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the blade. Then, he extended his 2 fingers and pinched the edge of the blade. The real chi within his body surged up as he exerted more pressure on the blade's edge. Suddenly, a dent appeared on the surface of the blade, it was a shallow imprint of his fingertips. Shi Mu creased his eyebrows, his face beamed with a satisfactory look. However, an idea dawned on him, and he was left motionless as he pondered over it. Suddenly, he raised his hand. Then, his 5 fingers moved and gathered together as they pinched with an unusual technique. The magic power within his body rapidly surged up. He started to mutter an incantation at the same time. After that, he opened his mouth and shot out a small group of white clouds like an arrow. It hit the stone stool kept in the corner. Bang! A loud sound resounded. That stool as thick as a human's waist and almost hundreds of kilograms in weight exploded as it had been shot by the chi arrow. The stone fragments scattered everywhere in his room. His room was filled with bursting sounds. Some of the stone fragments flew towards Shi Mu's face. But, he raised his hand and shot down the approaching stone fragments. This astounding power had far surpassed Xiaoming's fireball technique. This technique was called the Qi explosion technique of the art of accumulating spirit power. Shi Mu had already made a breakthrough to the 3rd stage of the art of accumulating spirit power. But, he didn't wish to reveal his magic arts in public. People considered him as a beginner in the world of magic. They figured that he only knew how to make paper charms. Now, he had a new trump card with this newly acquired chi explosion art. It usually took some time to release the airball in a real fight. However, it would still catch an opponent off guard. Chapter 88, Spiritual Mutation of the Eyes. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu put on his clothes. Then, he went to the table and sat down. After that, he took out one luminous spirit stone from his shirt. It was emitting bright blue light. He bent his head and stared at it closely for a moment. He then took out the jade slip containing the sacred book of charm magic from his clothes and placed it against his forehead. Suddenly, a complex formula popped up in his mind. It consisted of 12 charm characters. Martial arts and magic arts. Both of them are cultivation arts. I should major in either one of these two, the other will be a secondary major. In any case, whether it is the martial arts or the magic art, if a warrior gets stuck in a bottleneck, then he turns towards another art. But, I'm different from other disciples because I know the moon-swallowing art. It can support my practice. Also, practicing a magic art doesn't take too much effort. This means that I can enhance my strength and practice martial arts at the same time. The formula arts helped me significantly in comparison with those aggressive magic arts. Now, I must successfully draw this body-lifting charm. Shi Mu removed the jade slip after a moment. Then, he muttered as he looked at the blue stone in his other hand. This blue spirit stone was a rare wind attribute stone. Moreover, the formula that Shi Mu had just learnt from the sacred book of charm magic was also the same wind attribute magic charm. As far as the wind attribute spirit stone was concerned, Shi Mu had helped an old disciple by making dozens of low-grade paper charms on his request. So, the old man had given him this stone as a reward for his conscientious work. But, Shi Mu had to give away his water attribute stone to the old man in exchange for this wind stone, as the wind element spirit stone was relatively scarce. What a pity that I don't possess the wind attribute induction strength. Now, I'll have to draw support from this stone's strength to make this paper charm. A trace of pain appeared on Shi Mu's face as he thought about his loss. Then, he took out a small bottle of red ink and a small stack of deep blue magic paper from his shirt. The blood red ink and the stack of paper were exuding an unpleasant fishy smell. However, a glowing twinkle could be seen inside the ink bottle, and the stack of paper looked relatively thick and exquisite in comparison with the ordinary charm papers. Shi Mu had spent a large amount of silvers to purchase these two things. However, he didn't have any other choice. The more complex and powerful the formula, the higher the quality of ink and paper needed. It was said that a high-grade ink was needed to draw a high-grade formula. It was extracted from a high-level rare beast's blood. The charm paper was also made from the skin of some formidable beast. The skin had undergone some special processes to be used for making charm papers. However, Shi Mu didn't need these high-quality things right now. The deep blue charm paper was enough for him. He spread the stuff on the table. Then, he took a few deep breaths and calmed himself down. After that, he picked up the brush and moistened it in the ink. He closed his eyes, and then abruptly opened them. An astonishing thing happened. Suddenly, Shi Mu's pupils enlarged to twice its original size. They had turned into a pair of pale golden pupils. The palm-sized piece of paper was magnified to the size of a table in his eyes. The fine texture on that charm paper that couldn't be seen by the naked eye had become visible to the size of an earthworm. It could be said that he could see even the tiniest particles. His eyesight mutation had started after the practice of the art of accumulating spirit power. His eyesight had drastically enhanced when he had started to practice this art 6 months ago. However, he hadn't paid much attention to this in the beginning. But, he had realized that his eyes had gone through a strange mutation with the breakthrough to the second stage of the art. Now, his pupils would turn into a pair of pale golden pupils if he instilled his magic power into them. This mutation had strengthened his eyesight incredibly. Moreover, it had endowed him with an unusual ability to turn his eyes into a pair of magnifiers at his discretion. Therefore, he could magnify the things he wanted to observe closely. He could enlarge anything to more than dozens of times of its original size. He had been shocked and scared when he had discovered this ability. But then, he had realized that this ability could be used to draw paper charms in an efficient manner. The success of a paper charm was determined primarily by the accuracy of the drawing. The charm characters must be drawn accurately, they must be placed at the right positions, and the magic patterns must be drawn according to the authoritative book. The charm characters in the charm magic weren't independent, they were connected to each other. Therefore, a charm magician usually took a long time to draw a paper charm, as even a minute mistake could ruin the entire paper charm. However, Shi Mu could draw a charm character with utmost accuracy and precise control by magnifying things with the help of his unusual eyesight. He had far surpassed the ordinary charm magicians with the help of this ability. Each charm magician possessed a different kind of spiritual knowledge and magic power. Even their element induction force was differed from each other's. So, their comprehension of charm magic was also different, even though they'd draw the same kind of charm symbol. This meant that Shi Mu couldn't directly copy the magic charm given in the sacred book of charm magic. He would have to draw up a magic charm first. Afterwards, he would successfully draw the perfect duplicate of the magic charm with the support of his eyesight's magnification ability. The high-grade charms were still a challenge to him. But, he had achieved 80 to 90% accuracy in drawing the low-grade charms. This had made him extremely excited. Other charm magicians could draw a successful paper charm after dozens of trials. But, Shi Mu's case was different. Therefore, he had been able to earn huge resources during the past 6 months. Shi Mu concentrated his eyes on the paper. Then, he sucked in a long breath. He held the blue spirit stone in one hand, and the brush in the other. He dipped the brush in the red ink. Then, he began to draw on the blue charm paper at a very slow speed. His speed was 20 or 30 times slower than his normal drawing speed. It seemed as if he was embroidering the pattern and characters. He observed every minute stroke on the paper with his outstanding eyes. Surprisingly, he finished drawing the first character in a short time. A faint trace of perspiration appeared on his forehead. However, he was totally unaware of it, it seemed as if he was unconscious. He continued to draw the second and the third character in the same way. The charm characters of the body-lifting charm soon filled the entire paper. Shi Mu was sweating profusely, so much so that his shirt had plastered to his back. A few minutes later, the 9th character dazzled brightly as Shi Mu drew it. He realized that something wasn't right. But, before he could do anything, the charm character ruptured and turned into a mass of blue light. Suddenly, the entire piece of charm paper got reduced to ashes amid the glaring light. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows as he saw this. Then, he put the brush down with an expressionless face. He was quite familiar with these incidents. This had happened countless times in the past 6 months. He'd always ended up witnessing this explosive sight the first time he'd draw a new charm. He stood completely motionless. He then closed his eyes and tried to recall every minute detail of the process. But, he couldn't find anything suspicious. Then, he turned around in a dejected manner. After that, he sat down on his bed and started to meditate to calm his mind down. He opened his eyes after a short while. A trace of happiness could be seen flashing across them. His face revealed a trace of clear understanding. Suddenly, he shot his hands and sprang out of his bed. He strode to the desk and spread out another piece of deep blue charm paper on the table. He thought for a moment. Then, he began to draw on the second paper charm. His drawing speed was a little faster than the previous time. The strokes that had previously troubled him were drawn in an extremely coherent and smooth manner this time. Eventually, the entire 12 characters had been drawn accurately on the paper. They composed a seemingly abstruse magic charm. Chapter 89, 13 Cuts in One Breath. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu finished drawing the second magic charm in an efficient manner. He noticed that the pattern he had drawn on the charm paper was identical to the sample recorded in the sacred book of charm magic. His heart brimmed with happiness. He put down the brush, and started to read some sort of an incantation. Then, he pinched the paper charm and shook it with the support of his magic power. However, nothing happened. It seemed as if the magic charm was nothing more than a piece of an ordinary scrap paper. It didn't respond. He tried again, but nothing happened. He flung the charm aside with a despondent sigh. Then, he went to his bed and sat down cross-legged. Soon, he fell into a deep meditative state. Shi Mu opened his eyes after a while. He seemed to have figured out the problem. Then, he picked up the brush, and started to draw for the third time. He tried to infuse his magic powers in the piece of paper after half an hour. However, the paper got self-ignited, and the magic charm failed for the third time. Almost 12 hours passed. Shi Mu was still sitting by his stone table. His pupils were pale golden, and he was moving his brush with rapt attention. This was the seventh paper charm that he was working on. The previous paper charms had received the same fate. They had failed because a certain character hadn't turned up correctly. His attempts had failed even if all characters had been drawn perfectly, since the charm paper had destroyed themselves to ashes in the last step of instilling magic power. The wind element spirit stone in his hand had lost its radiance with the passage of time. It was clear that the spiritual energy inside it wasn't abundant. He was drawing the magic charm according to the method based on some sort of synchronous spirit-filling technique recorded in the ancient book. According to it, he could fill the spirit immediately after drawing the charm. He could save plenty of time in this manner. However, Shi Mu's complexion turned pale as the seventh paper charm also turned into a piece of scrap paper. He sucked in a long breath, and then exhaled it. He repeated this a few times until his mind had regained its tranquility. Then, he took out the jade slip of the sacred book of charm magic and placed it against his forehead. He gesticulated something with his other hand at the same time. His eyes flashed after a while. Then, he slowly put the jade slip down. He had finally figured out the point where he had been committing mistakes while going through the book. He controlled his breathing once again, and sat down on the stone bed. He returned to the table once he was sure that his magic power had been stabilized. He muttered as he picked up the brush, "I mustn't repeat the same mistake again. I didn't know that this body lifting technique would be so hard to finish. Anyways, this charm is composed of 12 low-level charm characters. It doesn't even constitute a middle-level charm. But, it's one of the most difficult charms to draw among the low-grade charms. The charms that I've drawn so far had just 5 or 6 characters. If I hadn't got my hands on the wind element spirit stone, then drawing this body-lifting charm would have been next to impossible. I've also practiced several times beforehand, and have made a lot of low-grade charms. So, I still hope to accomplish this task. Other magician practitioner can't do it. So, I should truly rely on this." He couldn't finish his words. Suddenly, his face became dignified as his eyes shrank. Then, they dilated and turned into a pair of golden pupils. He had used this strange technique of spirit eye to its full extent this time. The blue charm paper appeared even larger than before, even its texture seemed more exquisite. Shi Mu settled his mind. Then, he held his breath and bent his head. He started to draw the 8th paper charm with utmost attention. Some strange feelings started to bubble up in his heart as he drew the charm character. He had never experienced these feelings before. Suddenly, he felt that the brush had become extremely heavy. But, it still moved in a free and smooth manner. He spent double time to draw this charm. The 12th character was finally drawn in a perfect manner. Suddenly, the pattern drawn on that paper charm emanated a mild blue light with a puff sound. Then, an invisible wind element force emerged out of it and started to swirl above the paper charm. Finally, the job is done. Shi Mu was delighted as he saw this. His eyes returned to their normal state, and everything before his eyes resumed to its original size. He brimmed with happiness as he picked up the body-lifting charm. It radiated a faint blue light. He looked at it carefully. He noticed that several mysterious and complex red spirit lines were twined together on top of the blue charm paper. They constituted a delicate and mysterious pattern. In fact, a person's eyes would get stuck on it the moment they fell on it. Shi Mu's eyes revealed a trace of excitement. He was impatient to try the power of the body lifting technique. He held the charm between his fingers. Then, he instilled his real qi into it. Suddenly, the blue paper charm ignited on its own. After that, a mass of blue-colored energy emerged out of the flames. Shi Mu pressed the burning paper charm to his skin. Puff! A light sound echoed. A blue light sparked with that sound. Suddenly, Shi Mu felt that he was shrouded by an invisible layer of blue energy. It felt gentle and warm. He felt as if his body had become very light. The weight of his body had reduced terrifically, so much so that even a gust of wind could blow him away. Shi Mu was awestruck. He checked his body from top to bottom. He couldn't find even the slightest of changes. He pounded his fists and kicked his legs a few times. He tried to move his limbs in every possible manner. He finally realized that they were lighter than before. He couldn't help but relate this to the word lithe. It was a marvelous feeling. Suddenly, his mind was struck by a brilliant brainwave. He felt like trying his 13 series of Gale Force blade art. He turned around to grasp the blade that lay on his bed. A cold light flashed as he picked up that shining steel blade. He concentrated his mind. He then poured his real qi into the blade through his arms with the help of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. The surface of the blade got covered by a thin layer of white light. Suddenly, his blade quivered and issued a faint sound, like that of a tiger or a dragon's roar. Ha! A strange light flashed in Shi Mu's eyes like an electric current. He shouted out loud as he made a stroke in the air with his blade. Suddenly, the snowy white light on the blade's surface trembled and divided into 12 blade shadows. Then, the fierce blade wind flooded the entire room like tsunami. 13 cuts. Shi Mu waited for the blade shadows to dissipate. Then, he looked at the wall and saw 13 distinct traces on its surface. This meant that he could temporarily achieve the consummate stage of the 13 series of Gale Force blade art with the support of the body lifting charm. He wielded his blade in the air one more time. The white light of his blade blossomed around him like a noble snow lotus. Then, it shrouded his entire body. Shi Mu continued to attempt the 13 series of Gale Force blade art for some time. Finally, the effect of the body lifting charm dissipated. The misty white blade shadows also dispersed then. Shi Mu stood motionless with the blade in his hand. His eyes revealed a thoughtful expression. The strikes of his blade had been continuous. Moreover, the real qi of the art of breeding heavenly elephants flowed smoothly within his body. This made his entire body blaze with energy. It seemed that his overwhelming strength was about to burst out of his body. But, he felt as if an unclear hindrance would appear in his way. He had achieved the consummate stage of the blade art with magnificent 13 cuts. However, he felt that he wouldn't be able to unleash the utmost strength of his blade. There's a rumor attached to this 13 series of Gale Force blade art. Some people say that this art is a Xian level art, but it has been artificially dismantled into 13 series. Suddenly, Shi Mu remembered a few words related to the art. These words were spoken by his former instructor Li Qinghai. Now, he had finally understood the crux of his words. He felt that Li Qinghai might have been right. But, he didn't let this thought linger in his mind for long. Right now, his priority was to make maximum use of the Spirit Stone, and draw as many body-lifting charms as possible before the spiritual energy of the stone got completely consumed up. After all, this magic charm would play a major role in increasing his strength. Chapter 90, Availing a Convenient Weapon. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu was in high spirits. He spread another piece of charm paper on the stone table. Then, he stabilized his mind, and started to draw another charm in a smooth manner. Now, he had a successful precedent to refer to. Therefore, his speed was faster than before. It was evening by the time Shi Mu finished drawing the third copy of the body-lifting charm. However, he was regretful since he could draw the charm only twice before the spiritual energy of the wind element spirit stone got exhausted. He got lost in thoughts as he gazed at the two successful copies. He realized that the ability of his miraculous eyesight had started to appear weaker as the complexity of the magic charms increased. However, he was satisfied with his progress. An ordinary charm magician would have to rely on his perception if he were to come across such a complex magic charm. Therefore, his success rate would be lower than Shi Mu's. Shi Mu had made a breakthrough to the third stage of the art of accumulating spirit power and the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He also had the body-lifting charm up his sleeve. So, he would have a favorable chance to struggle through to the high ranks in the annual competition. After all, the awards for the quarterly competition couldn't be placed in the same league as the great rewards offered for the victories in annual competition. However, he needed to prepare a powerful weapon. He felt that his current blade was an ordinary blade that couldn't withstand the might of his real chi. He had realized this while practicing the 13 series of Gale Force blade art a while ago. Therefore, he had been unable to display his entire strength. He thought about the situation carefully. Then, he returned to his bed and sat down cross-legged. He exhibited the posture of 5 hearts towards heaven 1, and began to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Shi Mu left his room early in the next morning. He followed the familiar path, and arrived in front of the blacksmith's shop. This shop belonged to Zhao family of the Flaming Beast group. Brother Shi, you're a very busy person. How did you spare time to visit my small shop? Could it be that you are looking for this elder brother to forge something for you? Zhao Ping spotted Shi Mu from a distance. He welcomed him with a broad smile. Brother Zhao, you're making fun of me. It's just that the competition is around the corner. So, I'm looking for a good weapon. I think you're the only person who can do this task efficiently, Shi Mu replied with a smile. Shi Mu had visited this place every time he had come to purchase pills in the past 6 months. The tools and gadgets recorded in the secret arts of their clan had always tempted his curiosity. Previously, he didn't have much money. All tasks except forging were so inferior that he couldn't earn a lot of money. However, his wealth had greatly increased in the past 6 months. Therefore, he had been constantly requesting Zhao Ping to forge ingenious weapons for him. As a result, the two of them had become familiar with each other with the passage of time. Oh. So, that's the case. Brother Shi, please come inside, Zhao Ping said with a chuckle. It was early morning. So, there was no one in the shop. Even the janitor disciples hadn't yet arrived, the room seemed lonely. All kinds of sharp weapons were stacked up on either side of the wooden shelves outside the shop. There were double-edged swords, halberds, heaven and earth ring, yin-yang axes and some other mysterious weapons. These weapons couldn't ignite Shi Mu's curiosity even though he had repeatedly visited the shop and had seen these weapons several times. I wonder what kind of weapon Brother Shi wants. The weapons that you can see lined up outside are the average pieces, the good ones are inside the room. Brother Shi, please follow me, Zhao Ping spoke with a smile. Then, he walked inside the room. The inner room was smaller, it was almost half the size of the outside room. Around 30 weapons were placed in the several compartments that were arranged in the room. These weapons seemed to be of high quality. I'm good at using knives and blades. So, I hope Brother Zhao would recommend a weapon with a hilt, Shi Mu looked around as he said. Zhao Ping nodded. Then, he grabbed one weapon. It was more than 2 feet long, it was a silver blade. He handed it over to Shi Mu and spoke, this blade is made of seabed's cold crystal, it's as strong as iron. It's extremely sharp and tough. Its incisive blow can slash even a strand of hair into two. It has a cold aura. Shi Mu grasped the blade and weighed it in his hand. Then, he knitted his brows. The blade was incredible. But, it was too light to hold, it felt as light as a hair strand to him. It's a good blade. But, it's too light. I'd prefer a heavier one, Shi Mu said as he handed the blade back to Zhao Ping. Zhao Ping was startled. This cold crystal iron blade was 25 kilograms in weight. It was strong enough to support and withstand one's real qi. Moreover, it was the best weapon for an ordinary Houtian warrior. Suddenly, he recalled the extraordinary strength Shi Mu had displayed when he had forged the iron pieces. Therefore, he accepted the fact. Then, he moved and picked up a long bronze blade. He extended it towards Shi Mu and said, "This blade was made by forging a red bronze stone. It weighs almost 70 kilograms. Brother Shi, try this one." Shi Mu gripped the hilt of the blade and flicked his wrist. Shua shua, a series of blade shadows flashed with repetitive piercing sounds, a chilling cold aura was spread inside the room. Suddenly, a trace of astonishment flashed through Zhao Ping's eyes as he noticed Shi Mu's astounding strength. He realized that Shi Mu was on the verge of stepping into Houtian intermediate stage. He couldn't even see any variation in his blade's movement. Suddenly, the blade shadows dissipated. Shi Mu gazed at the blade for a while. Then, he shook his head and said, "It's still a little light. Do you have a heavier one?" Zhao Ping was dumbfounded. This blade was enormously heavy. But, he had still found it to be light. "This is the heaviest blade in my shop. It's quite heavy, almost 70 kilograms, Zhao Ping said gloomily. Then, he stopped speaking, he seemed to be lost in thoughts. "What's the matter, brother Zhao?" Shi Mu noticed that Zhao Ping's countenance had changed. "So," he asked with raised eyebrows. "If you want to have a heavier blade, a real treasure, then I do have one in my shop. But, this blade is special," Zhao Ping spoke in a hesitant manner. "Oh! What's so special about it? You can talk to me without any hesitation." Shi Mu's eyes lit up brightly, there was an expression of curiosity in them. "Let me fetch it first. Then, I'll talk about it." "Brother Shi, please wait." Zhao Ping entered a back room. He reappeared with a long, narrow, and ordinary-looking wooden case in his arms. Shi Mu's eyes flashed. The object inside the case seemed to be extremely heavy as Zhao Ping's veins were protruding from his muscles. In fact, it seemed that he was straining himself to walk. Bang! Zhao Ping placed the box on the table with a dull thumping sound. Shi Mu's eyes sparked as he opened the lid. Suddenly, a strange look flashed across his eyes. A long and thin blade lay inside the box. It was dark black in color. It didn't look magnificent at the first glance. But, Shi Mu realized that it wasn't an average blade as he took a closer look. The surface of the blade revealed a faint black luminescence. Shi Mu's eyes dazzled with excitement. He grabbed the blade's hilt and picked it up. Suddenly, his complexion changed. The blade was extremely heavy even though it looked ordinary, it weighed at least 250 kilograms. It was hard to tell what sort of material was used to forge it. "It's an exquisite blade." Shi Mu brushed its surface with his finger. Suddenly, an ice-cold feeling transmitted through his finger. He couldn't suppress his yearn to try it out. Therefore, he held the blade's hilt. A black shadow flashed as he waved his arm. It streaked across a black piece of stone kept for testing weapons. Crack! The piece of stone got divided into two equal halves with a mild sound. The stone was made up of refined steel. However, it was slashed into two parts in a clean and precise manner. Shi Mu's eyes glittered brightly. He had slashed off the stone without feeling any resistance. He had felt like he had cut a piece of tofu. Brother Shi is born with great strength. This blade is made up of a foreign object, a meteor iron that fell on the earth. When I discovered it, I spent a huge sum of precious materials, and invested 3 months to forge it. And, the result was fruitful. It turned out to be incomparably sharp. I'd say that I've never forged such an incredible weapon in my entire life. Zhao Ping was mesmerized as he saw Shi Mu's swift movement. He had lifted the blade easily even though it weighed 250 kilograms. So, he was satisfied, and held his thumb up in approval. Then, he gave an introduction of the blade with pride. "It's really good. I want this one." Shi Mu sized up the black blade from top to bottom, and returned it to its case. Then, he nodded with satisfaction as he spoke. "Brother Shi, don't rush into making a decision. There's still something about this blade that I haven't told you yet," Zhao Ping interrupted Shi Mu and said as he waved his hand anxiously.